Richard Burton Matheson was an American author and screenwriter, primarily in the fantasy, horror, and science fiction genres. He may be known best as the author of I Am Legend, a 1954 horror novel that has been adapted for the screen 4 times, although 6 more of his novels or short stories have been adapted as major motion pictures: The Shrinking Man, Hell House, What Dreams May Come, Bid Time Return, A Stir of Echoes and Button. Matheson also wrote numerous television episodes of The Twilight Zone for Rod Serling, including Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, and Steel. He later adapted his 1971 short story Duel as a screenplay, which was promptly directed by a young Steven Spielberg, for the television movie of the same name. Career: Matheson's first short story was published when he was only 8 years old, appearing in his local newspaper The Brooklyn Eagle. After graduating from Brooklyn Technical High School in 1943, he did a spell of service in the U.S. Army, an experience which featured in his 1960 novel The Beardless Warriors. After the war he studied journalism at the University of Missouri, graduating in 1949. His first novel, Hunger and Thirst, was ignored by publishers for several decades, but his short story Born of Man and Woman was published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Summer 1950, the New Quarterly's 3rd issue, and attracted attention. It is the tale of a monstrous child chained by its parents in the cellar, cast as the creature's diary in poignantly non-idiomatic English. Later that year he placed stories in the 1st and 3rd numbers of Galaxy Science Fiction, a new monthly. His first anthology of work was published in 1954. Between 1950 and 1971, he produced dozens of stories, frequently blending elements of the science fiction, horror, and fantasy genres. He was a member of the Southern California School of Writers in the 1950s and 1960s, which included Charles Beaumont, Ray Bradbury, George Clayton Johnson, William F. Nolan, Jerry Sohel, and others. Matheson appears in 2 documentaries related to this era, Jason V. Brock's Charles Beaumont, The Life of Twilight Zone's Magic Man, and The Acker Monster Chronicles, which details the life of agent and editor Forrest J. Ackerman. Several of his stories, like Third from the Sun, Deadline, and Button, are simple sketches with twist endings. Others, like Trespass, Being, and Mutes, explore their characters' dilemmas over 20 or 30 pages. Some tales, such as The Doll That Does Everything, and The Funeral, incorporate zany satirical humor at the expense of genre cliché copyright S, and are written in an hysterically overblown prose very different from Matheson's usual pared-down style. Others, like The Test, and Steel, portray the moral and physical struggles of ordinary people, rather than the then nearly ubiquitous scientists and superheroes, in situations which are at once futuristic and everyday. Still others, such as Madhouse, The Curious Child, and perhaps most of all, Duel, are tales of paranoia, in which the everyday environment of the present day becomes inexplicably alien or threatening. Duel was adapted into the 1971 TV movie of the same name. Matheson wrote screenplays for several television programs, including the westerns Cheyenne, Have Gun Will Travel, and Lawman. He is, however, most closely associated with the American TV series The Twilight Zone, for which he wrote more than a dozen episodes, including Steel, and the famous Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, plus Little Girl Lost, a story about a young girl tumbling into the 4th dimension. For all of Matheson's Twilight Zone scripts, he also wrote the introductory and closing statements spoken by creator Rod Serling. He adapted 5 works of Edgar Allan Poe for Roger Corman's Poe series, including House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Raven. He wrote the popular Star Trek episode The Enemy Within. For Hammer Films he adapted Dennis Wheatley's The Devil Rides Out. In 1973, Matheson earned an Edgar Award from the Mystery Writers of America for his teleplay For the Night Stalker, one of 2 TV movies written by Matheson that preceded the series Kolchak, The Night Stalker. Matheson also wrote the screenplay for Fanatic, starring Tallulah Bankhead and Stephanie Powers. Matheson's first novel, Someone is Bleeding, was published by Lion Books in 1953. His early novels include The Shrinking Man and a science fiction vampire novel, I Am Legend. Other Matheson novels turned into notable films include What Dreams May Come, A Stir of Echoes, Bid Time Return, and Hull House, the last two adapted and scripted by Matheson himself. 3 of his short stories were filmed together as Trilogy of Terror, including Prey with its famous Zuni warrior doll. Matheson's short story Button, was filmed as The Box in 2009, and was previously adapted for a 1986 episode of The Twilight Zone. In 1960, Matheson published The Beardless Warriors, a non-fantastic, autobiographical novel about teenage American soldiers in World War II. It was filmed in 1967 as The Young Warriors, though most of Matheson's plot was jettisoned. During the 1950s he published a handful of Western stories. And during the 1990s he published Western novels such as Journal of the Gun Years, The Gunfight, The Memoirs of Wild Bill Hickok, and Shadow on the Sun. He has also written a Blackley comic locked room mystery novel, Now You See Eater, aptly dedicated to Robert Bloch, and the suspense novels 7 Steps to Midnight and Hunted Past Reason. In 1993, Matheson published a non-fiction work The Path, inspired by his interest in psychic phenomena. Matheson cited specific inspirations for many of his works. Duel derived from an incident in which he and a friend, Jerry Sohal, were dangerously tailgated by a large truck on the same day as the Kennedy assassination. A scene from the 1953 movie Let's Do It Again, in which Aldo Ray and Ray Milland put on each other's hats, one of which is far too big for the other, sparked the thought, what if someone put on his own hat and that happened, which became The Shrinking Man. Bid Time Return began when Matheson saw a movie poster featuring a beautiful picture of Maude Adams and wondered what would happen if someone fell in love with such an old picture. In the introduction to Noir, 3 novels of suspense, which collects 3 of his early books, Matheson said the first chapter of his suspense novel Someone is Bleeding describes exactly his meeting with his wife Ruth, and in the case of What Dreams May Come, the whole novel is filled with scenes from our past. According to film critic Roger Ebert, Matheson's scientific approach to the supernatural in I Am Legend and other novels from the 1950s and early 1960s anticipated pseudo-realistic fantasy novels like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist. Personal life: Matheson was born in Allendale, New Jersey, the son of Norwegian immigrants Fanny and Bertolf Matheson, a tile floor installer. Matheson was raised in Brooklyn and graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School in 1943. He then entered the military and spent World War II as an infantry soldier. In 1949, he earned his bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri and in 1951, he moved to California. He married Ruth Ann Woodson on July 1, 1952. They had 4 children, 3 of whom became writers of fiction and screenplays. Matheson died June 23, 2013 at his home in Los Angeles, California. Awards: Matheson received the World Fantasy Award for Life Achievement in 1984 and the Bram Stoker Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Horror Writers Association in 1991. The Science Fiction Hall of Fame inducted him in 2010. At the annual World Fantasy Conventions he won 2 judged, annual literary awards for particular works, World Fantasy Awards for Bid Time Return as the best novel of 1975 and Richard Matheson, Collected Stories as the best collection of 1989. Matheson died just days before he was due to receive the Visionary Award at the 39th Saturn Awards ceremony. As a tribute, the ceremony will be dedicated to him and the award will be presented posthumously. Academy President Robert Holguin said Richard unregistered trademark S accomplishments will live on forever in the imaginations of everyone who read or saw his inspired and inimitable work. Influence: Other writers: Stephen King has listed Matheson as a creative influence and his novel Cell is dedicated to Matheson, along with filmmaker George A. Romero. Romero has frequently acknowledged Matheson as an inspiration and listed the shambling vampire creatures that appear in the first film version of I Am Legend as the inspiration for the zombie ghouls he envisioned in Night of the Living Dead. Anne Rice stated that when she was a child, Matheson's short story A Dress of White Silk was an early influence on her interest in vampires and fantasy fiction. Directors. After his death, several figures offered tributes to his life and work. Director Steven Spielberg said, Richard Matheson, a unregistered trademark's ironic and iconic imagination, created seminal science fiction stories and gave me my first break when he wrote the short story and screenplay for Duel. His Twilight Zones were among my favorites, and he recently worked with us on Real Steel. For me, he is in the same category as Bradbury and Asimov. Another frequent collaborator, Roger Corman, said Richard Matheson was a close friend and the best screenwriter I ever worked with. I always shot his first draft. I will miss him. On Twitter, director Edgar Wright wrote, if it's true that the great Richard Matheson has passed away, 140 characters can't begin to cover what he has given the sci-fi and horror genre. While director Richard Kelly added, I loved Richard Matheson's writing and it was a huge honor getting to adapt his story button into a film. R.I.P. Works, novels. Short stories. Short story collections. Films. Television. Non-fiction, The Path, Metaphysics for the 90s, additional reading. California Sorcery, edited by William F. Nolan and William Schaefer, Jad Haytham, character copyright Infinita copyright Simul, Paris, Louisiana unregistered trademark Harmattan, 2007, see also, references. External links, Richard Matheson at the Internet Speculative Fiction Database, Matheson biography at tabula-rasa.info, Richard Matheson featured on AMC TV Sci-Fi Department Hub show, Richard Matheson at the Internet Movie Database, Richard Matheson at Find a Grave, Richard Matheson at Memory Alpha, Richard Matheson Archive of American Television Interview, Richard Matheson biography at the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame.